There is a mythology that the arc of justice bends on its own. It does not. It is bent by hands too many to name, each pulling lightly in the same direction for a very long time. In that sense, the most radical act available to a citizen in an age of performative law is persistence. Persist in jury service when called. Persist in refusing the easy cynicism that calls every verdict rigged. Persist in rewarding institutions that behave like institutions and punishing those that perform like parties. Cynicism feels like sophistication. It is surrender wearing a tuxedo. What of the pardoned themselves? Law can no longer speak to their pasts. It can still speak to their futures. A pardon lifts jeopardy. It does not confer trust. If they appear again as advocates or experts, panels in courts and committees can ask the questions clemency avoided. Where are the facts? Where is the remorse? Where is the professional candor that allows a system to rehabilitate? Mercy without acknowledgement is not reconciliation, it is indulgence. And indulgence, bestowed repeatedly on the powerful, curdles into doctrine. There will be hard days, cases dismissed on technicalities, juries hung by doubt, skillfully manufactured, judges reversing on grounds the public does not understand. Those days are not proof that the effort fails. They are proof that the effort is legal. We cannot recover a nation of laws by means that confess we have given up on law. Process is not a fetish, it is a prophylactic. It is what keeps punishment from becoming policy. It is in the end the only difference between accountability and revenge. If this sounds slow, that is because it is. The Republic's enemies move quickly because their objective is simple. Acquit the friend, absolve the leader, invert the fear. The Republic's defenders must move carefully because their objective is subtle. Teach the next generation that fear belongs to the law, not to its subjects. That lesson cannot be shouted. It must be demonstrated until it becomes boring again. The most promising sign that we have recovered will not be a spectacular conviction or a viral speech. It will be tedium, the return of law to the background hum of a society that does not notice it because it is working. Until then, every institution should adopt a discipline of daylight. Publish. It happened quietly, no ceremony, no anthem, no solemn address to the nation, just the sound of a pen gliding across paper, one stroke at a time, signing away the very principle that once separated power from impunity. Late at night, in the private quarters of a president who long ago decided that law is merely another tool of politics, the pardons began to flow. Names once synonymous with conspiracy, manipulation, and defiance of the American vote were suddenly reborn in ink. Giuliani, Eastman, Meadows, Powell, Chesebro, Ellis, Bob. Each name carried a story, each story carried a verdict, and each verdict was undone by one man's will. In that moment, something fundamental cracked not just in the machinery of justice, but in the logic of the Republic itself. The pardon power, designed by the framers as a mercy for justice's mistakes, had mutated into a license for its destruction. This wasn't mercy, it was recruitment. Across Washington, you could almost feel the air tighten. Prosecutors who had spent years reconstructing the broken architecture of accountability watched as the walls they rebuilt dissolved overnight. Judges who believed in the slow, deliberate gravity of law saw it replaced by something simpler and far more dangerous, a system that now answers not to principle, but to personal loyalty. The ink on those pardons didn't just absolve individuals, it rewrote the meaning of consequence. It told the nation, if you serve power faithfully enough, no verdict can touch you. For more than 2 centuries, the American experiment survived on an unspoken compact that no man, not even a president, stands above the law. That compact just met its exception. Because when a president pardons his own accomplices, the act isn't legal administration, it's institutional suicide. To understand how this happened, you have to go back not to January 6th, not to the campaign rallies or the indictments, but to the Constitution itself. The pardon power was born from the founders' ambivalence about justice. They believed in the rule of law, but also in human fallibility. Mistakes would happen, courts could err, juries could be cruel. The pardon was the remedy, a human override for the mechanical cruelty of process. Alexander Hamilton called it an act of grace. George Washington used it sparingly. Jefferson reluctantly. Lincoln mercifully. Each understood that clemency was not ownership, it was stewardship. To pardon was to reaffirm justice by tempering it, not to destroy it by defying it. But like every tool of mercy, it carried within it a latent poison. Discretion without oversight. Unchecked authority demands restraint, and restraint requires character. The founders never imagined a president who would weaponize grace. They assumed, perhaps naively, that ambition would be checked by honor. They were wrong. For decades, the power lay dormant, abused only at the margins, occasional corruption, political favors, the indulgence of allies, but nothing compared to this. A sitting president converting the constitutional power of pardon into an instrument of political recruitment. This was not a gesture of forgiveness, it was a signal to loyalists that the law now bends to allegiance, a signal to prosecutors that their work is conditional, and a signal to the nation that the Constitution, once considered self-executing, now depends on the conscience of the one most immune to it. When the framers gave a president the power to pardon, they assumed the guardrail would be shame. They never anticipated a man without it. Law only works when fear outweighs loyalty, when the potential cost of obedience to a leader exceeds the price of defying him. That equilibrium is what scholars call deterrence, and it's what keeps democracies from dissolving into cults of personality. But deterrence dies the moment power promises protection. Trump's pardons did not merely erase guilt, they inverted fear. Where once the system frightened men into obedience to the Constitution, it now incentivized them to violate it. When the president told his allies, in effect, I will pardon those who stand with me, he did something no modern American president had dared to do. He declared criminality a condition of loyalty. In autocracy, corruption, election interference, obstruction, all now lives under the same shadow, the presidential pen. It is the most silent of weapons, quiet, invisible, irreversible. For over 200 years, the American system relied not on force, but on faith. The Constitution didn't stop a president from pardoning his co-conspirators. It assumed he wouldn't. That assumption was our weakest link, because faith, once broken, cannot be codified back into law. So deterrence collapsed not with a riot, not with a coup, but with signatures. The consequences ripple outward. Every future official, campaign lawyer, or strategist now knows the precedent. Serve power ruthlessly, and you will never face punishment so long as that power endures. It's an insurance policy for corruption, payable in loyalty. That realization doesn't merely distort politics, it disfigures citizenship itself. Because in a democracy, the difference between obedience and complicity is supposed to be choice. But what happens when the system rewards the latter? Then you are no longer a citizen, you are a subject. Every nation tells itself a myth about the balance of its institutions. Ours was simple. The executive leads, the legislature constrains, the judiciary interprets. Three co-equal branches, bound by ambition, kept honest by accountability. But that myth only survives when all three believe in the same hierarchy, law above power. Once the executive places himself above it, the system begins to tilt. The legislature becomes a stage, the judiciary a set piece, the Constitution a script rewritten in real time. That's what the pardons represent, the codification of inequality before the law. For generations, the phrase rule of law meant that no one could erase a verdict simply because they disliked it. Now it means something narrower, no one except the one. And it is here, in the small print of immunity and privilege, that republics die. Not with soldiers in the street, but with lawyers in suits, redefining limits into loopholes. What makes Trump's latest wave of pardons different from all others is its purpose. Most presidents forgive to forget. This one forgives to recruit. Each pardon doubles as a contract past absolution in exchange for future service. The lawyers who drafted false electors' memos, the advisors who weaponized faith in democracy against itself, the strategists who treated the law as a speed bump, all now understand. The president rewards participation, not repentance. And once loyalty becomes currency, legality becomes optional. Across the nation, state prosecutors face the aftermath. Their docket's still full of cases against the same conspirators, but their momentum crushed under federal absolution. Legally, state jurisdiction remains untouched. Politically, the signal is devastating. Because when the highest office in the land declares your crimes patriotic, juries begin to doubt whether guilt even exists. That is how impunity metastasizes, not by silencing the courts, but by confusing the citizens. When people no longer know whom to believe, they stop believing altogether. And in that vacuum, power becomes its own evidence. The irony is almost surgical. The same legal scholars who once defended broad executive power in the name of efficiency now face the monster they built. They argued that a president must act decisively, that immunity is essential for leadership, that the office must not be paralyzed by fear of prosecution. They never imagined the office itself would become the crime scene. Impunity is not lawlessness, it's selective law. It's the ability to decide when rules apply and to whom. And it always begins with noble excuses, stability, continuity, the need to protect the state. But once accepted, it grows. Under Trump, impunity evolved from practice into doctrine. The Supreme Court's deference to core executive functions gave it constitutional cover. The party's silence gave it political oxygen. The media's exhaustion gave it permanence. And so an old republic learned a new word: untouchable. For centuries, the people were told that checks and balances guaranteed accountability, that the president was powerful but not invincible. Now, the same document that gave him power also shields him from its consequences. It's a contradiction so profound it ceases to be political. It becomes theological. If the president is the sole interpreter of his duties, then law is faith, and faith has no appeal. The danger isn't that future presidents will all be tyrants. It's that they will all be pragmatists. They'll see what worked and imitate it, quietly, surgically, without spectacle. One abuses openly, the next refines professionally. By the time we notice, the line between legality and immunity will have blurred beyond recognition. Empires rarely fall by revolution. They corrode from within, rusted by the slow seep of impunity through their institutions. The judges still wear robes, the Congress still gavels to order, the Constitution still sits under glass but meaning leaks away. We call it gridlock, we call it polarization, but beneath those words lies a simpler diagnosis: disbelief. The public no longer believes that justice is possible, and when belief dies, compliance follows. Why obey laws written by people who no longer obey them? Why respect verdicts erased by one man's whim? Once cynicism becomes common sense, tyranny no longer needs to announce itself. It governs by fatigue. You can see it already. The news cycle spins outrage into background noise. The opposition exhausts itself, issuing statements that no longer matter. Each scandal competes with the next until accountability itself becomes unclickable. And in that fatigue, power thrives. That's why Trump's pardons matter more than any single investigation or trial. They're not just acts of clemency, they're proof of concept, proof that law can be gamed, precedent manipulated, morality monetized. He didn't destroy the system, he revealed its design flaw. The Constitution assumes character. When character fails, words are paper. It is tempting to treat a pardon as a punctuation mark final, declarative, immune to revision, but in a constitutional order, nothing is truly final if it empties the words that sustain it of meaning. A signature can dismiss a case, it cannot dismiss consequences. Consequences do not always wear the face of courtrooms. They arrive as erosion of trust, of restraint, of the quiet mutualism between citizen and state that makes enforcement possible without force. The late-night wave of clemency did not merely liberate individuals from jeopardy, it liberated a method. It demonstrated that in the hands of the willing, law can be domesticated, trained to sit and stay. That is not jurisprudence, that is dominion. The pardon power is supposed to be a scalpel narrow, corrective, reluctant. It has become a banner under which the unaccountable march. The difference matters because instruments shape incentives. When clemency is mercy, it chastens the system. When clemency is policy, it instructs the system to accommodate its abusers. Future actors absorb the lesson. Ambitious attorneys learn that imagination outruns compliance. Campaign operatives discover that proximity to power is a hedge against exposure. And the public, whose patience sustains the legitimacy of verdicts, learns the worst lesson of all, that compliance is for the unconnected. There are, of course, replies, appeals to history, to necessity, to the myth of balance. Some will say that presidents have always shielded allies, that Andrew Johnson carpeted the defeated South with pardons, that Ford healed a nation by pardoning Nixon, that Clinton's last-minute absolutions were no less transactional, that Obama trimmed sentences to redress excess. Each claim holds some fragment of truth, and each misses the point. Past abuses were episodic. This is systemic. In prior eras, clemency was controversial because it collided with justice. Today, clemency is strategic because it replaces justice. That is a transformation of function, not merely of frequency. What then remains? The states. Federalism is not a slogan, it is an architecture designed for days like this. Days when national institutions falter and local ones must shoulder responsibilities they did not seek. A presidential pardon cannot vacate a state indictment, cannot dissolve a local jury, cannot rewrite the criminal codes of Georgia or Arizona or Michigan. But power can chill even where it cannot reach. Jurors do not deliberate in a vacuum. They read the same headlines as the rest of us. When a president broadcasts absolution for co-conspirators, a portion of the public hears not law, but permission. That is why state prosecutions now carry a double burden. They must prove the elements of crimes in court and the plausibility of accountability in culture. The answer to that double burden is not volume, it is rigor. Cases must be narrow enough to survive appeal, yet broad enough to describe the truth. Charges must be chosen for law, not optics. Prosecutors must adopt the discipline of surgeons, clear indications, clean margins, minimal drama. The public can forgive delay, it cannot forgive performative failure, and judges too often relegated to referees in spectacles they did not script must reclaim what only they can provide: reasons. Lengthy, careful, footnoted reasons that explain not to the partisans of the moment, but to the future, why findings of fact survived and why conclusions of law bind. The United States will not be argued out of this moment on cable. It will be written out of it in opinions. There will be calls, understandable ones, to legislate constraints on clemency. Congress can condition procedures, require transparency, demand logs and certifications and disclosures. It can criminalize bribery for pardon schemes and compel recusal where personal interest is manifest. But statutes operate downstream of culture. If a political movement exalts impunity as loyalty, the most artful drafting will feel like barricades of paper. A wiser path, if not an easier one, is to starve impunity at its source: patronage. The economy of access, the promise that law will accommodate the faithful, requires a market. Markets require confidence, and confidence dissolves when participants pay real prices. The quiet sanction lost licenses, disbarments, ethics rulings, procurement debarments, corporate integrity agreements, enforced to the letter will do more to recalibrate incentives than 1,000 op-eds. There is a kind of justice the public rarely sees, the slow attrition of professional privilege when conduct betrays duty. It is not dramatic, which is why it works. Meanwhile, we will hear arguments from the sanctuaries of abstraction that the court has spoken on immunity, that the Constitution vests plenary power in the executive, that remedy lies at the ballot box. It is tidy doctrine. It is also incomplete. Elections register preference. They do not repair precedent. If you teach a generation of political actors that law is a matter of endurance, that the side that lasts longest without shame wins, no vote can restore what habits have undone. The cure is not merely alternation in office, it is restoration of taboo. Serious nations keep some things out of bounds, not because they are illegal, but because they are unthinkable. Pardoning one's partners in the subversion of an election belongs among those things. If it is not, then we should expect more of it. This is why tone matters. Speed, volume, fury, these are the dialects of spectacle. Law speaks differently when it is healthy. It speaks in cautions and caveats, in margins of error and burdens of proof. The Republic needs that voice now, even if punditry mistakes it for weakness. A careful sentence is not a timid one. It is the syntax of legitimacy. The next attorney who drafts an indictment against a powerful defendant should imagine not the broadcast but the archive, how the reasoning will read when the heat of the moment has cooled, and the only question that remains is whether the state behaved as a state. If we are to rebuild the habits that make clemency merciful rather than mercenary, we must also rebuild the habits that make punishment credible rather than cathartic. Consider the quiet actors who hold more leverage than their titles suggest. Bar counsel reviewing grievance files that once gathered dust. Inspector General with authority to publish facts without permission. Corporate boards that can decide whether lawyers who sold impunity deserve to sell advice. Accreditation bodies that can say simply, not anymore. These mechanisms lack spectacle. They possess endurance. They do not trend. They accumulate. And accountability, like erosion, is cumulative. There is a mythology that the arc of justice bends on its own. It does not. It is bent by hands, too many to name, each pulling lightly in the same direction for a very long time. In that sense, the most radical act available to a citizen in an age of performative law is persistence. Persist in jury service when called. Persist in refusing the easy cynicism that calls every verdict rigged. Persist in rewarding institutions that behave like institutions and punishing those that perform like parties. Cynicism feels like sophistication. It is surrender wearing a tuxedo.